As Troy said, I spent the last 20 odd years, odd being the operative factor, as president of AIM and working with a lot of end users in the records management and document management community. So you see all that kind of stuff captured on here. What I wanted to touch on before I start is something that is personally important to me and why I think the work that all of you all do is so critically important to the future and so underestimated, I think, often within the agencies that you serve. And these folks here, these are my grandparents. They came across from Italy in 1921. They were marginal English speakers. They were married in 1924, which is that awesome-looking outfit that my grandmother has on here. They had 2 kids. My dad was one, born in 1925, and my uncle, who was born in 1928. They are both long gone now. And the family aspect of this, that's kind of weird and quirky, and that highlights for me on a personal level why all of what you do is so important, is that my dad never talked about his family at all. And so the story in our family was that these 2 people died in 1930. And that was what we all thought. And it was only in the last couple of years, relying on records, relying on information that stewards 20, 30, 50 years ago captured, that we realized that these people were in fact alive through 2002. And there's a really crazy-ass story about this. And if you want it, hit me up with an email at jmancini77@gmail.com, and I'll tell you the story. I won't kind of bore it. But my point here is that what we do now is important to the legacy that the people that will come in the future will have to rely upon to understand what the heck we all did. And I think in that regard, it's really important. So, as I said, I spent a lot of time at AIM. Some of the data points are from AIM research. If you haven't downloaded it, the stuff's all free. You can get it at aim.org/research. Take a look at it and download it. And so, my topic is the elephants in the room. And we spent some time today starting with big picture, moving and talking about how different agencies and NARA are helping facilitate the journey that M1921 represents. And so what I wanted to do is maybe come back up again, because I think that M1921 is not just another one of those like check off the boxes for compliance purposes. I think it's a tipping point in terms of what digital futures look like within the government community. And as you think about that, I think one of the things that I want to do is highlight, what are some of those things you ought to be thinking about that are the elephants that we don't like to talk about. And so the first question is, does anybody know where the phrase elephants in the room came from? No fair Googling. Okay, the answer is that there was a Broadway show in 1935 starring Jimmy Durante, and this Broadway show featured Jimmy Durante as a young man at some point, and a live elephant on a Broadway stage leading across, and supposedly the funniest line of the play, which maybe reflects the fact that these people were in the Depression at the time, was a policeman comes up to Jimmy Durante as he's leading this elephant across the room, and he says, "Sure, son, what are you doing with that elephant?" And Jimmy Durante replies, "What elephant?" That was the hysterical moment in the play, and that's where the phrase elephant in the room came from, was from that experience. So I think we need to be conscious of this as we think about this, and as we think about M1921 in broader terms than just the box-checking exercise. So the first thing that I think we need to acknowledge is that these are not normal times. I've been in the technology space for 30, 35 years. We think that the most recent period is one that represents radical change. We haven't seen anything yet. We are on the cusp of really, really dramatic change in how information is managed. And if we are preoccupied with legacy, we're going to miss the wave. And so we've all seen data points like this. This is the time to reach 50 million users. Telephone, automobiles, electricity, credit cards, all the way down to Pokemon Go, which took 19 days to reach 50 million users. This is the context in which you all have to do your jobs. This is the context in which information is changing. And it's a pretty challenging dynamic when you think about it moving forward. And so the Singularity Group looked at 9 exponential technology trends. Some of them relate to what the problem that we have before us today. Some of them don't. But when you think about, there was kind of some jokes earlier about blockchain. When you think about blockchain, when you think about robotic process automation, when you think about artificial intelligence, when you think about machine learning, it may not seem that those are related to this exercise of meeting the M1921 compliance requirements, but they are directly related to that challenge. And it represents a big challenge moving forward, because when you think about what happens in disruptive times, this is Ray Kurzweil, who's the Singularity dude. And so what he posits, and I think it's very applicable to the challenge that you all face in terms of having a forward thrust to your thinking about information management, is that when we try to predict the future, we extrapolate, that bottom line to, where we think we're going to wind up. And in disruptive times, we don't wind up there. We wind up way, way up here in some unexpected place. And so thinking about what those opportunities are, thinking about how you incorporate them into your future thinking with regards to meeting M1921, how do you take M1921 and view it as a way to rethink your information modernization strategy, I think becomes a really important issue. And so when you think about this is an AIM data point. I've asked this of about 1,000 people in the last 6 months in all sorts of different venues. And it's a simple question. But I said, think about the huge amounts of information and data coming into your organization. Call this X. What do you think it's going to be in 2 to 3 years? And the answer that comes back averages about 4X. That's not business as usual. That's a dramatically different environment. That's not putting paper into boxes and shipping it off someplace. That represents getting ahead of the curve and thinking about it. And if that's not challenging enough, you got to think about this from a non-traditional perspective. Like I say, I've been in the records and content space a long time. We've always been this weird cul-de-sac in the data management community. But we're not an afterthought. We're the central thought to the challenge that people have in overcoming information chaos. Because when I ask folks, okay, well, what percentage of all that 4.2x is unstructured or semi-structured information? What percentage of that stuff is TIFF files and PDF files and JPEGs and application files and Word files and PowerPoints and transcripts and voice messages and all that stuff? The answer, again, multiple surveys, comes back 55, 60, 65%. So that is a huge forward-looking challenge that I think everybody needs to think about as they think about incorporating the M1921 compliance objectives into their planning. And I think the issue that people have now is that in the tsunami that's coming in terms of change in information management, this is, how do you surf that? This is the largest surfed wave ever recorded off the coast of Portugal. That little yellow circle is the dude surfing that. Surfing that requires rethinking the nature of the challenge. And I think rethinking the nature of the challenge is an opportunity that M1921 poses for all of us. It's not easy, but it's an opportunity. So that's one part. As you might guess, there's going to be a but here, which is I talk a lot of times to all sorts of like cool people. They think about all these future things that I just went through. But there's also a reality that we all deal with, which is that we have legacies of technology. Technologies have long tails associated with it. And so as I was thinking about this presentation on Sunday and Monday, I started thinking about our own personal experience in our house with technology. And we like to consider ourselves like pretty cool characters when it comes to technology adoption. And as I started looking around the house, these are some of the things that I found. Our incredible filing system. Why we do this, I have no idea. Why we have a folder in there that has all those manuals that you get when you buy a new lawnmower and stuff like that, all of which are available online. Why do we do that? It's a long legacy tale of information management that we somehow need to maintain, but is no longer relevant. I looked a little further. We've got this telephone. We've got a landline. Do not call me on this landline because we do not answer this phone. It just rings, and we have no idea why we have it, but it's still there. Look also around the house here. You've got these DVDs, you've got CDs, we've got these Costco film things. All of this is stuff that represents legacy technologies that still need to be managed. We all have that in our organizations and agencies that we are still responsible for, and we've got to figure out how we deal with it. This is my alarm clock here. And I started thinking about this. I thought, certainly the state-of-the-art in alarm clock technology has advanced since we got this alarm clock. So I started to think, well, where the hell did we get this alarm clock? And of course, my wife, who never forgets anything, which is a very fine attribute most of the time. She had recently been clearing out some boxes, and she said, oh, we got it as a wedding present 40 years ago. And here's the bridal registry. We got it from Colleen and Paul Bell, who I went to elementary school with. So clearly our records management roots run deeply in our family. But the point is that technologies, no matter how rapidly they're changing, have a long tail. And we are the custodians and stewards of that long tail. And it can't be neglected along the way. This is a Washington Post article. I haven't sent a fax in probably 5 years. But the Post pointed out there's still 17 million fax machines out there in the UX, and they're sending millions and millions of faxes. Paper needs to be incorporated into an information management flow. This data point, U.S. companies spend more than $120 billion a year on printed forms. They usually outdate themselves within 3 months. All of its information, legacy information that needs to be digitized and converted into a way that we can integrate it into our forward-looking strategies. This data point, this is invoices on a global basis that are sent. Data point there, 550 billion invoices sent on an annual basis around the world. 2/3 of those are in unstructured formats like paper and PDF. 2/3. We've been doing invoice processing in this industry for 20 years, and there is still a huge tail out there. Last data point. This is my mom. She's 88 years old. You start thinking about, sort of that drag on our processes that having to satisfy multiple constituents represents. My mom's a pretty savvy technology person. She's got an iPad. I do IT support for that iPad. But there's 116 million people in this country that are over the age of 50. 20% of them don't have internet access. And so as you think about processes, as you think about information modernization, that's a tale that has to be incorporated into your planning. And it's not easy. So a modern information management strategy requires, I think, an awareness of where you need to be, where you are, and where you've been. And that isn't easy. And so that gets me to my third elephant, which is that, and I see this in many, many surveys that we do, there's a lot of wishful thinking out there, particularly when you talk to senior people about where they think they are, and then you talk to the people in the trenches that actually do the work, and you ask them, where are you actually? And there's a big gap out there. So I was thinking about this quote from the NARA report in September, which is awesome work. If you haven't looked at it in any detail, it's terrific work in terms of reviewing what's going on in all the different agencies. And I thought, I saw this quote, 98% of agencies shows confidence they will meet the target to manage all permanent electronic records in electronic format in like about 20 days. And I thought, what the hell are we doing here? How hard can this be? And so then I played around a little bit, and I looked at the RMSA reports, the records management self-assessments that are done for NARA, and I looked at the at the email readiness assessments, and I just plotted those things on this little cool chart here. And then I looked at NARA's criteria for low risk, the people that basically kind of had their act together. And the low risk people are these folks up here in the upper right-hand corner. Everybody else has challenges. And so there's a lot of wishful thinking about there. And this isn't a government-specific dig. Believe me, you go in the private sector, this is all out there. And it's that gap between intentions and reality. And so as you think about this, I think, and you try to think about how to address this, there's just a couple things I'd like to leave you with as we think about this moving forward. And that's to use the discipline of M1921 with regards to paper and records to not just think about paper and records, but how does it affect your information modernization strategy moving forward? And who do you need to help you sort through that strategy? And it's not just a matter of buying a bunch of hardware and software. It requires strategy, and you need some trusted advisors to help you do that. So as you think about this, there's a lot of simple but wrong answers. The complex ones, but right, are out there. As you think about this, I think in the digital age, information is at the heart of how agency value is created. It's not an afterthought. It's not a bolt-on. It has to be incorporated into the very fabric of how information is gathered on the front end. Because if you don't do it on the front end and you don't do it in an automated fashion, like Courtney was saying, you're going to be treading water moving forward. And so it's to not just deal with paper records, but figure out how you use it as a weapon to modernize your overall information management strategy. And so as you think about that, I think it's very important to understand where you are and where you're going, and understand where you are on that curve. That begins with consolidating information flows. It then moves for automate those information flows. And then thirdly, it means taking those information flows and integrate them into your business processes, into your organizational and governmental processes. And that progression is not a simple one. And if organizations, there are a lot of vendors that will come and hop all the way up to point 3 and say, let's hop in there. Well, if you haven't done the basic blocking and tackling of consolidating those paper and electronic information flows in the first place, assigning metadata to them, managing them in an automated fashion, all the things that NARA talks about, if you haven't done that, forget about those modern digital flows out there. And so I'd just like to pose 2 challenges. Maybe this is something we can think about for future iterations of this. The first one is I think records officers need to step up their game. They need to elevate their thinking and become part of the strategic equation within their agencies. That is easier said than done, but I do believe that RIM and governance skills are critical to value creation moving forward. They're not just a question of how you store information so that somebody will look for it someday. But I think there's a parallel challenge, and I see this all the time in both the public and private sectors, is that senior folks need to stop viewing this as hygiene and housekeeping. This is value creation for the future. That's what this is all about, and that's why this is important. And so I'd like to leave you with one final disruptive thought as you think about M1921 compliance. And this is from newspapers.com. And if you haven't been to newspapers.com, just from a technology perspective, the OCR work that they've done is just mind-boggling in terms of finding information hidden within newspapers from 100 years ago. So this one was from 1859, And on September 2nd, 1859, a massive solar storm composed of subatomic particles slammed into the Earth's protective magnetosphere. It generated energy of the equivalent of 10 billion atomic bombs. It was known as the Carrington Event. It was viewed all throughout the world at nighttime as if it was daytime. And so, as I was thinking about all the things that we worry about on a day-to-day basis, if this happened today, scientists believe if the same thing would happen today, it would cause catastrophic damage with crippling power grids, satellites, GPS, communication systems, all of that stuff. It would make all of our worries about M1921 just be moot. And so let's relax and enjoy the holidays. So thank you all very much.